A very warm welcome to IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 12. I'm Ritwika Gupta. Today on the show, we have an exclusive panel discussion lined up focused on the vital role that MSMEs play in India's economy, the challenges they face, especially in exports, taxes and strategies to boost global competitiveness. Let me first quickly welcome my three panelists. Dr. Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO of Federation of Indian Export Organizations. Mr. Anil Bhardwaj, Secretary General, Federation of Indian Micro and Small Medium Enterprises. And Dr. Padmanand V, Partner Public Sector Consulting, Thornton Bharat. Well, thank you all for joining us today. By way of opening remarks, I'd like to ask each one of you the critical role that MSMEs play in India's economic growth and how they can serve as a backbone for various sectors.
If you're looking into India's economic growth, it has been spectacular in recent years. Post-pandemic, we clocked a GDP growth of 9.7% in financial year 2022, followed by 7% in 23, and the recent data puts her 8.2% in financial year 24.
Okay.
This growth has been achieved despite headwinds in the global trade and global economy. And one of the reasons for that has been the spectacular performance of Indian MSMEs. The role of MSMEs is extremely important as they are the job creators in the country. In fact, next to the agriculture, they create large number of jobs into the countries, and they are now penetrated in the all segment of economy, be it manufacturing, services, agriculture, allied sector. Their contribution to GDP is currently at around 35%, and government is looking into evolving an ecosystem where their contribution may go out to as high as 50%. They are one of the major contributors in Indian exports also. Presently, they are contributing over 35% of the country's exports, and in fact, their basic job is to provide innovation and entrepreneurship. They are quite nimble. We have seen the spectacular performance of this segment in post-pandemic, where they helped India not only to be a large producer of face masks and PPE kit, but also in ventilators, where we were a net importer. We have emerged as a large exporters.
All right. Dr. Padmanand?
Yeah, to just put the whole thing in context or perspective, India is already purchasing power parity-wise the third largest economy in the world. And even in, as per real exchange rates, in maybe another 4-5 years, we would be the third largest economy in the world, beating even Japan. But again, what we need to understand in the global perspective is we remain very small, 1/8 of the USA in terms of GDP, 1/5 of China in terms of GDP. This is the broad concept. Now, the good sign here is the growth rate. The growth rate propelled by domestic consumption, the large mass of youth here who live on tomorrow's income, various other factors, the low wage cost, arbitrage, which is also propelling the growth.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the growth of 7.2% and more, 7% and more the last couple of years, 6.5% FY24, you would find that it's something that other economies only dream of. There is no way they can realize this kind of growth due to various reasons. And if you analyze slightly deeper which sectors, you will find agri, services and industry. Tino ko dekhenge. So you will find that agri is about 19 to 20%, services about 53-54%, industry about 28%. And within these three sectors, the growth rate in agri is literally always been characteristically not very high, be 2.3 to 3%. But the other sectors, service industry is what is contributing to the economic growth and GDP growth. Within the service sector, again, services, you have trade, hotels, transport. In industry, you have chemicals, construction, also automotives, auto components, pharma, etc., all contributing to growth.
Sure.
You will find that 40 to 50% of all this is from the MSME sector. In fact, what we used to say is when we used to work extensively abroad, even recently, what India has is perhaps the largest MSME sector in the world. And we also have the largest number of clusters in the world. clusters being the basis of competition to MSMEs.
Mr. Anil?
See, so far as India's MSMEs and their contribution is concerned, I mean, it is almost a cliche to say that they are the backbone of Indian economy. They contribute to over 50%, so over 30% to India's GDP. And then if you include certain sectors, it can go up to almost 35%. They employ over 11 crore people as per the National Sample Survey of 2019.
All right.
And this translates to generating jobs for millions for fostering inclusive growth. Why inclusive? See, if you look at MSMEs, almost 50% of the enterprises and the people employed therein belong to either marginalized society, marginalized sections of society, or backward classes. Secondly, the number itself is very large. There are more than 6 crore enterprises. But if you look at the number of people employed and the number of MSMEs, one important fact that comes out of Indian economy is that, see, currently barely 3% of people are employed by the governments in India, around 7% by all the corporates put together. So 10% is the total number.
Sure.
So rest of the people, if they are not working in the farms, they are either running an enterprise or people are working with an enterprise. So literally almost entire India, a majority of India is employed by the MSME sector. Another important fact is that, it's an entrepreneurship engine, so to say. If you look at the number of people that they employ, the number of enterprises they are, and the new enterprises that are being created through various schemes of the government.
Absolutely.
And one important factor that is to be noted, especially after the COVID, is almost 80% of MSMEs in India have adopted at least one digital tool. According to the McKinsey company report of 2020, that, this digital inclusion has tremendously empowered a very large section of society. I mean, not only made them entrepreneur, but also they reduced their vulnerability during the crisis period, and also have put them to a platform where they could be reached out by various support measures, agencies, and development programs.
All right. I want to circle back to you, Dr. Ajay. I want to talk about the MSMEs in the export sector. Given the recent trend of muted exports and a 3% decline in merchandise exports in the last fiscal year, tell us what key challenges are faced by MSMEs in the export sector and what strategies can be implemented to help boost export performance.
In fact, you have rightly said that India's exports in the last financial year has declined by around 3%, but that's more to do with the global contraction in the trade, and that's why India is not a country. Most of the countries have suffered a dent in their exports. When we are talking about India's exports, we have done extremely good in technology and knowledge-driven sectors of export, be it machinery, electrical and electronics, automobile, auto component, pharmaceuticals, medical and diagnostic equipment. Our problem has been in the labor-intensive sectors of exports. And unfortunately, in these segments of exports, more than 90% of the contribution is coming from the MSME.
Right.
When we talk to the industry, one of the issues which comes forward is the issue of skilling or reskilling and upskilling. The other is the issue of the free trade agreements also. So I think on the free trade agreement, the government has of late become quite an aggressive. We have seen many of the agreement, and the good thing is that now government is focusing more on going for the free trade agreement with complementary economies so that the domestic industry do not face the kind of challenges which they have faced in the past. Coming back to the export sector, when you are talking about the MSME, the basic challenge still is the availability of fund and the cost of fund. In fact, we have seen that with the increase in the prices of the most of the material and hike in the freight rate, the demand for credit has gone up. And with the challenge on the Red Sea, with the bigger voice time, we are seeing that the period for the credit has also elongated. So the first challenge which they are facing is with regard to the availability of fund. We hope that the continuation of a scheme like Emergency Credit Link Guarantee Scheme, which ECLGS, which has helped the industry in the past, with collateral-free lending can be coming quite handy for export sectors also. Second is the issue of the cost of the fund, because after all, exporters, they are compete in the global market, and in many of the countries, the cost of the fund is half than that of the India, and that's why The MSMEs have been given the benefit of the interest equalization scheme. The interest equalization subvention rate for the MSME has been reduced from 5% to 3% because the key rates at that point of time has come down to around 4.6%. Now the key repo rate has already moved to 6.5. So there is need to provide concessional credit to the SMEs for the export sector.
Sure. Mr. Anil, I would like to bring you in here. Tax issues, especially for small online sellers, are a significant concern. What are the primary tax-related challenges that these sellers encounter, and how can the tax framework be reformed to ease the burden in the MSME sector?
The problems faced by sellers, especially through the e-commerce platforms, there are a couple of issues they face. First of all, that as you know, that up to 40 lakh of turnover, if you want, it is not necessary to get yourself registered with the GST. But in case of e-commerce, even if your turnover is zero, you are required to register yourself with the GST.
Right.
And it brings along with it its own cost of compliance and other issues. This is one major issue which kind of poses a hurdle for a large number of people who are starting their own business and they don't want to get into the difficulties of compliance of GST, especially women working from home, for example. Secondly, the other difficulty they face is that, if you are supplying to different states, so what you are required to do is that you have to register in all those states and you have to provide a specific place where, the local authorities can contact you. So I think we, with the help of technology, with the help of AI and other tools that are available today, I think we need to find a solution so that the concerns of the authorities are also addressed and the problems and the cost of compliance that is there for MSMEs could also be reduced.
It's time for a quick break here. On the other side, we'll discuss the key lessons we can learn from international MSME development to improve policy framework for MSMEs here in India. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 12. Today we are in a panel discussion drawing on the global best practices that can enhance the competitiveness and growth of India's MSMEs. Listen in. Dr. Padmanand, given your extensive work in agribusiness and the promotion of farmer-producer organizations, tell us how can these entities be leveraged to strengthen the MSME sector, especially in rural areas?
We are working with the largest number of FPOs in the country, more than 1,500 FPOs at any point of time. So we are the biggest players, the FPO, meaning the agribusiness farmer startup space, farmers into entrepreneurs. That is one. Now, and we also work at the top end of the value chain, meaning we have established the maximum number of food parks and cold chains in the country, more than $1.5 billion worth on PPP mode, because we manage many government of India schemes, related schemes, including in the MSME sector. Now, what we find is, now the main thing, again, if you look at competitiveness and the growth of the MSME sector, the competitiveness in the agri and food processing sector is very critically linked to, like I said, the production stage. So if you look at the value chain, you start off from production, then you come to post-harvest infrastructure, then you come to processing infrastructure. Post-harvest and processing is where we find the so-called typical MSMEs in this space, and then into exports, logistics and exports. Now, until the production segment itself is competitive, they should be competitive, only then can you go into developing competitive food processing sector, which will be globally competitive. I'm not talking about nationally or regionally competitive.
Right.
So until you develop the post-harvest segment and the production segment competitively, only then can you develop the processing segment competitively. Because food processing unit cannot survive operating only for producing 2 months a year or 3 months a year. He will require input supply throughout the year and competitive prices. So you require the post-harvest infrastructure to be developed. So we are doing it. We are developing schemes, roping in World Bank ADB funds towards such area. We're also managing several states, World Bank and ADB related project design, program design itself, 2,300 crore, 3,000 crores in every state, and then implementation.
Dr. Ajay, coming back to you, with the increasing focus on sustainability and the introduction of carbon taxes globally, how do you see these developments impacting Indian MSMEs?
We are of the view that non-trade issues are going to dominate the global trade in next decades or so. We have seen that the focus has come on the environment and labor in a big way. And ESG is something which we have to adopt as quickly as possible.
Okay.
All the countries in the world, particularly the advanced countries, they are using these non-trade issues to deny market access to India and to many developing countries. We have seen that is starting with the EU CBAM, which has now been extended by UK also, though of course UK CBAM will also be extended to the glass sector also. We have seen EU deforestation regulation coming in, which will seriously hamper the export of leather, agriculture products, coffee, and related products in a big way. Our take on that is that we have to sensitize the industry. We have to educate the industry and provide handholding to the industry, particularly to the MSMEs, because they are not at all aware of these developments and they will take little more time.
Sure. Mr. Anil, just picking up from what you said earlier, you spoke about compliance with GST and how processes need to be simplified using technologies like AI. So tell me, from your point of view, are you seeing smaller businesses taking to digitization, or is there still a long way to go?
They are open. After all, MSMEs are a pragmatic lot. And if they think that, they can survive better, they can grow better with the help of technologies, why not? They would adopt. And I think Indians have shown remarkable adaptability in coping with technologies, especially digital technologies. And so are the MSMEs. The smallest of the trader, you would find that, they have all the digital tools available to transact business. So the adaptability is not the issue. The problems, when it gets to industry, the question then becomes that, the cost of financing to adopting the newer ways of digital world. For example, they might be required to change their hardware. They may be required to buy expensive softwares. So we have to see that, whether they have the legacy systems that could be replaced by the advanced machinery. There are tools available for financing them, and there are also the skills available so that people who are skilled enough who can work in MSMEs. So I think access to right kind of products, access to finance, and access to skill set would be quite important for easing their adaptability.
Dr. Padmanand, coming to you, you've had experiences across over 25 countries. What lessons from international MSME development and economic policies do you think could be applied to improve the investment climate and the policy framework for MSMEs in India?
So what we find is earlier, till about a few years ago, what we used to do is the rest of the developing world used to learn from India. So we used to experiment, learn the Hubble models in India and replicate it worldwide. That's what the UN used to do. When I was with the UN also, and in Grant Thornton also, we've been doing this extensively. So what you'll find is India has been the mother of learnings for developing the MSME sector, both in terms of policy, and also in field level interventions. Now, some interventions we learned from countries like, say, Italy. The UN and World Bank had introduced the cluster model. I was also the planning commission, etc., which is now a bigger intervention across India for the last 2 decades. The cluster-based interventions are on, both soft interventions as well as hard interventions.
Absolutely.
So that is very appropriate. We have learned from the MSME sector in other developed countries,
sure,
including in Italy and also in other countries of the world, which is also documented by Michael Porter, Competitive Advantage of Nations. So that is, we have learned from the developed countries and we have taken it to the next level.
Fantastic. That was indeed a fruitful discussion. But before I let you go, I have one final question for each one of you. Now, it is clear that building a supportive ecosystem is essential for MSMEs to make a mark on the global stage. But what will it take for MSMEs in India to go global? Let's start with you, Dr. Ajay.
Indian MSME, to a large extent, they are global. They know that if they want to get a bigger market, they have to look into exports in a big way, because right now, if they are catering to 1/6 of the population, they have 6 times the market available. And with such a size of the market, you can achieve the economy of scale And once you do that, probably you will be more competitive also.
Mr. Anil?
Exports as quite a challenge for MSMEs. If you look at it from the Indian context, barely less than 1% of MSMEs are actually in exports. Still, so far they have contributed significantly. So in one way, you could see that that shows that how much potential is there. That if more number of MSMEs are geared up, supported, oriented for exports, so the Indian exports could rise.
Okay.
But at the same time, I am also sees to the fact that the productive capacities in India in the MSME space are limited. Their size is very, very, very small, and they are micro in nature. And I think globally, if you want to be the real dominant player and sustainable exporter, then your size has to increase.
Dr. Padmanand, I'll let you have the last word.
I think interventions to develop the MSME sector, which is again already the largest in the world, and really develop them as to be and help develop India and to be really a global superpower of the say amongst the top slot in the top slot. We require both field level as well as policy interventions, both of them. We may be making a few percentage points in terms of intervention, but dissemination is something that is required, and that resources and everyone work together as a team, sharing information, all development practitioners, we could ensure that we become not just number 3 superpower, we become the global superpower in a decade or two. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today for this exclusive discussion. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 12. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.